everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a book review. Just bear with me, I just need to go and get the book. Okay, I should have had a book in front of me at the start. This is the book I'm going to be reviewing. It's a novella by the American author John Barth. I never actually heard of this author before until I'd read Carpe Diem, The Ancient Art of Seizing the Day, and this book was mentioned in there. And it's actually two novellas contained in here, The Floating Opera and The End of the Road. I haven't read The Floating Opera. I don't know whether or not I want to, having read The End of the Road. The End of the Road is meant to follow on from The Floating Opera, but they can be read separately. I have to say that it wasn't my favourite book I've read. It was quite a slog in places and was quite hard to keep going. I was reading it because I'm interested in philosophy, and it's a novella of ideas, and because I was interested in the ideas it contained and and particularly what they have to say about masking, which is the main reason why I read the book, because it's all about how we act out roles in life, and I thought that element was really interesting. Let me know if you've read this book or heard of it. It's by an American author, so if you're American you might possibly be aware of it, or you might not be. So yeah, it's a philosophical novella, and it has been described, The End of the Road that is, and it has been described as a nihilistic tragedy by some critics. Now the story concerns a love triangle in which a bachelor, the narrator Jacob Horner, makes love to a married woman with her husband's consent, resulting in a tragedy after strongly held values are taken to the end of the road, or taken to their logical conclusions. I'm not going to let you know what that tragedy is, because that would spoil it for any of you who haven't read the book and want to read it. The novella expounds the philosophical idea that nothing has intrinsic worth, and therefore the only values that have any validity are subjective, relative ones that are peculiar to each person. The character Joe Morgan is Jacob Horner's opposite. Jacob Horner is the narrator of the novel, and Joe Morgan is his opposite. Joe, unlike Jacob, strongly believes in certain relative values that he bases his life around. This gives his life conviction and a motive force, so that he is never paralysed by indecision. He knows how to act based on his very strongly held relative values, knowing full well they don't have any absolute universal value, and that someone else might hold very, very different values, but to him these values mean everything, and he's willing to base his life on these values, and indeed die for them if need be. So he knows how to live based on his strong values, while all the while knowing, as I just put it a minute ago, that his values are ultimately on a cosmic level meaningless. His relative value is his marriage to Rennie. Although he asserts that, I quote, "there's nothing intrinsically valuable about marriage," he still values it more than anything else in the world. But because marriage is no absolute, he himself has had to decide the reasons for its importance without recourse to external authority. And that's the kind of main philosophical theme of the book, is that we create our own values. They don't come to us ready-made by others. Now, Jacob Horner is the complete opposite to Joe. Unlike Joe, he has no stable identity and does not uphold any one value as being more meaningful than any other. He is full of contradictions and divided opinion, and often cannot make up his mind about anything. Jacob says that, I quote, "You imagine so many alternatives to each position that it makes you dissatisfied with any." That quote had real resonance for me. You imagine so many alternatives to each position that it makes you dissatisfied with any. I don't know if any of you experienced this problem of indecision. It's well known to me, partly because my interests are so deep and intense, and I want to really incorporate every element of the interest. Well, how do you decide what part of the interest to focus on, where there's so many different elements that are potentially equally interesting? And so therefore Jacob experiences extreme difficulty making simple choices. If possible, he would choose all for books. You know, he loves books. He's a grammar teacher, Jacob is. But as this is not possible, he is often paralysed. And it's interesting, actually, that the character Jacob, I mean, he's not said to be autistic or anything, you know, so this is all open to interpretation. Obviously, the novel was written before Autism was really well known, understood, as it was written in the 1950s. But as I was reading a novella, I was thinking, there are many traits of autism I can see in Jacob. He loves to rock. As he says, you know, he's an habitual rocker. Since he was in a cradle, he would rock. And he doesn't really have any friends. He's not the most social of people. He's very pedantic and he loves grammar. And I was thinking, he could be autistic, this character. It's quite interesting because in quite a few philosophical novels and novellas I've read, but I've noticed characters with autistic traits, particularly concerning this type of philosophy, the philosophy of meaning. It's very interesting. It makes me wonder whether, you know, if the author themselves, you know, I don't know if the author was autistic, or I don't know anything about the author, so I can't comment, but, you know, whether or not these authors are aware of this type of person in the world, who now we would think of as having Asperger's. So it's an interesting thing, I find. So I can relate to this sense of choice overload, because although, unlike Jacob, I have very strong relative values that guide my life, values that are conditioned by my super strong interests. You know, I'm not short of values, far from it. I have incredibly strong, intense values that guide my life, that give my life meaning and purpose. I have a ravenous appetite and I need to absorb everything. So when I'm researching recipes or books, I experience a great degree of indecision when I try and choose what to read or eat next. Unlike Jacob, I will eventually choose one option or another, but I always feel a sense of pressure and tension because I can't experience everything. The book is most interesting philosophically and you know, really gets going, because up until that point it was a little bit of a slog, as I said, and I was thinking at one point of giving up because I just wasn't finding it that interesting, and I was thinking, come on, get to the meaty bits, get to the proper hardcore philosophy. I mean, it's philosophical all the way through, but the first part really is more about relationships, and I'm not particularly interested in relationships. I find it a little bit boring. Other people might find that more interesting, but I don't know. But it really starts moving in a chapter 6 of the book, chapter 6, where Jacob experiences something called cosmopsis, or the cosmic view. This refers to the fact that he no longer has any convincing reasons to continue doing anything, and all choices appear equally meaningless within the global universal view. That's chapter 6, where it really starts getting moving. Jacob is frozen, he can't move, and stayed immobile all night on a station bench. He was then approached by a doctor who takes him to a remobilisation farm, sounds almost a little bit Orwellian, and prescribes him therapy as a way of getting Jacob moving again. Jacob is first of all advised to exercise frequently, act impulsively, you know, without too much deliberation, because Jacob often, you know, finds it very hard to make decisions, and not let himself get stuck between alternatives. He's encouraged to join various activities and to be engaged with his interests. Finally, he is prescribed something called mythotherapy. I actually googled mythotherapy to find out if such a thing really exists in real life, and apparently it does, but I hadn't heard of it before. It's quite an interesting concept. This therapy is based on the idea that we create ourselves by choosing our identity, which can be changed at will. The doctor says that, I quote, "Everyone is the hero of his own life story." Everyone is the hero of his own life story. In mythotherapy, we assign ourselves and others roles within a story that we've invented. According to the book, this is something that most people do all the time anyway, but sometimes the story grinds to a halt and immobility is the result. Reflecting on this, I wonder if this is why life is so hard for me, because it is harder as an autistic person to create a meaningful story, as I'm not connected to the invisible Wi-Fi that most people are part of. What do you think? If we have no character to play, or no assigned role in a theatre of life, we can lose our sense of self and therefore find it hard to make decisions and act in the world. I think this could be part of the autistic problem, and it certainly has a lot of relevance to my own life, where I often feel not really connected, not really sure of who I am, a lot of identity confusion, And I'm very conscious, of course, of acting out roles and playing roles, trying to copy others, but I never really feel at home in any of the roles I play. So I could relate to this. I think this could be part of the autistic problem, as the book argues that the ego, or the I, needs a mask. It's a very interesting concept, that the ego actually needs a mask, because the ego is I and the I is ego. The mask is for ego, is for I. That's what the book argues. I find it quite. I was thinking about this a lot, and it's quite a lot to get your head around, but a very interesting idea. And the idea that the ego needs a mask to exist at all and to engage with the world. The mask, kind of in a sense, gives the person a self, really, and because you need to have a mask to be active, to have an identity. Without a mask, without an identity, you won't know what to do or how to live your life. Maybe that's the autistic problem, I don't know, but it made a lot of sense to me anyway, certainly in how I often feel quite kind of like undecided or uncertain about things. So let me know what you think about this idea, that, you can't get, we often talk about masking in autism, but really there's this idea that actually we can't help but not mask, because everyone masks. I want to talk about this in greater depth. I'm not going to go into it all now, but it was just something that I was reflecting on quite a lot and trying to get my head around, because I thought it was quite an interesting concept. And also, as part of my background reading, I came across the sociologist Erving Goffman's theory that we all perform roles or wear masks. That's part of being human. We all perform roles or wear masks. This is called the dramaturgical approach, and suggests that social interaction is like a theatrical performance. All the world is the stage, to quote from Shakespeare. Goffman argues that we can't escape our masks, which has implications for personal authenticity. Interestingly, however, Goffman argues that we can only be authentic if there is an alignment between our personal, private identity and our social identity. So that the role we play must be compatible with our beliefs and core values. Crucially, Goffman notes that, to quote, "And to the degree that the individual maintains a show before others that he himself does not believe, he can come to experience a special kind of alienation from self and a special kind of wariness of others." Now that quote really spoke a lot to me, because this is my life. In that quote is my life. And to the degree that the individual maintains a show before others that he himself does not believe, he can come to experience a special kind of alienation from self and a special kind of wariness of others. Do any of you experience this? Because I think this is at the heart of the autistic predicament. We all mask, non-autistic mask as well. You can't escape from masking. I guess if the only people who might not mask at all would be those who just don't have any self. And I guess there's some extreme kind of, I guess maybe in like classic autism or like very profound autism, where the person can't mask at all, they literally wouldn't have a self, maybe. As this would argue. But in Asperger's, that type of autism, we mask a lot. But maybe the problem is, it's not so much that masking, it's not so much the masking itself that is distinctive, because non-autistic people mask as well. Everyone masks. It's more the fact that in autism, there's experienced this extreme dissonance, or disconnect, because we don't own the mask, we don't believe in the mask, whereas say non-autistic people, because they're connected to that universal Wi-Fi, although they're masking and they might be aware of it to a greater or lesser extent, and it might affect them to a greater or lesser extent. I know that some people get depressed by this and do develop certain mental problems as a result of it, because people are more or less sensitive to having to do it, but generally speaking, your average neurotypical will go around masking, and they might be aware they're masking, but it obviously doesn't affect them and make them immobile or like paralysed, or like it doesn't obviously affect their identity, or otherwise everyone would have mental problems, which clearly isn't the case. So obviously for most people, they can go about doing this without it affecting their psyche too much. And I think that's part of the autistic predicament, is that we're putting on masks that we just don't believe in. We haven't really we're not really part of that universal social contract. We haven't joined up to it. We feel we're having to do it under duress, and that's painful, whereas non-autistics just do it because they're part of the social world more. So let me know what you think. So that's why I think we experience this alienation, a real problem with masking, and non-autistic people don't. So yes, so as I say, that deeply resonated with me. I wonder whether The reason, as just to put it another way, why most neurotypicals can happily mask most of the time without experiencing it as a problem is because there is a greater degree of compatibility between their private self and public self. Although they will put on a public mask, they can do this more or less willingly without the masking threatening a sense of self and identity. I already said that, I'm just saying it again. Conversely, it is much harder as an autistic to wear a public mask that is personally acceptable, because being autistic, we are not connected to the invisible social contract that most people can effortlessly reside in. Simply put, we are more likely to wear masks that we don't believe in because our whole neurology revolts against the neurotypical social contract, and we only do it because we don't want to face ridicule and social rejection, and that is not really a reason to mask if we're doing it under a sense of almost like threat. That is no way to go about your life, and I don't think neurotypicals really would understand that, because for them, they're part of the social world. From day one, they've signed up, almost involuntarily maybe, just because their brains are wired in that particular way to respond to social stuff. So for them, it's not a big deal having to be social to such an extent. At least if you're like an average neurotypical. I admit there are neurotypicals out there who do find this a problem. As I said, they're the ones who have developmental problems. But I'm talking about your average neurotypical who goes through life without this being a big problem. And that would be obviously the majority, because otherwise everything would grind to a halt. If everyone said, oh, I can't mask, this is awful, they wouldn't go to work or anything because it would be too stressful for them. So obviously it's not a problem for most neurotypicals. So I'm thinking that must be the reason for this alienation in autism. So do let me know what you think. Well, I'm going to finish this section now, and I'm moving on to my next video. Carrying on with the theme of masking in the next video. Moving away from the book now, but I want to read out an interesting poem to you. So, moving on to part 2.